Ed, thanks for joining us. Greg Gaug with Ulupono Initiative. Really excited to chat with you today.
Thanks so much for having me. Always happy to be here.
Yeah, so maybe just kind of jumping right in. I know, you've obviously been with the department for a while, but newly appointed director. So just kind of high level, what's your vision for the department, for the next 4 years or potentially even longer?
Yeah, so for the last 8 years, I was honored to be the Deputy Director of Highways for the Department of Transportation. And in that area, that space, safety, system preservation, and resilience, always the biggest things that we could push forward on. As we start expanding that mission into airports and harbors, that mission expands as well. Infrastructure is what we do. Infrastructure is how we affect things for the public. But it's got to be infrastructure for a reason. And with Governor Green's initiatives, we're making sure that our infrastructure improvements meet those priorities, biggest of which is housing for everybody. We're making sure that our resources can push it forward and make sure that we can incentivize and make housing development a lot easier as we go forward. Another one for us is energy and food security, trying to see how we can be part of the solution in our own operations, and then reach out to ensure that we're part of the solution for other entities, both public and private. Making sure that from an education perspective, all of our operations can be tied back into high schools and to universities, so we can start bringing up the next generations to take over for us as we move forward. And then the biggest of which of all of these things, and that ties it all back together, is a cost of living, our economy here. Making sure that the people who are born and raised here can actually live here and sustain themselves here.
How do you view kind of multimodal options, whether bike, walking, transit? You mentioned e-bike, which I know we'll get into later. It's an exciting program you guys got on. But where do you view that as part of the solution or the options?
Tremendous opportunity for the state to provide more transportation choice for everyone. When you go out throughout the islands in Hawaii, we have projects that were built with multimodal access to them. And that multimodal access extends as far as that project went. Then it stops. When the project stops, so does the multimodal access. So you have breaks in the system throughout. Last year, we updated our bike plan for the state to make sure that we could focus on critical transportation needs, definitely in areas that are safety risks. We made sure that we could have prioritized those, put a funding amount to it, so we could make sure that we could go to the legislature and ask for that money and say, if we want this, we want to serve the community by providing these modes of transportation, these transportation choices, this is what it'll cost. So it was effective in getting it to the legislature. They gave us a bill that gave us another $20 million in funding to push directly towards these types of, for walking and biking in different areas on both state system and county systems. Great. So it works out really good for everybody. Now for me, the transportation choices, gotta be real choices. So if I built out a bike path from Nanakuli to downtown, I don't expect anybody to be riding it, right? From downtown to Nanakuli. But what that path would provide is connectivity in between to every community there. So from Nanakuli, they can get into Kapolei, Kalaeloa, and Kalaeloa to Ewa, and Ewa to Kapolei. So everything's connected from there. That's the choices that we want to provide. When we get those commercial units closer to where people live, now that 15 to 20 minute sweet spot is developed in a lot of different communities, in a lot of different areas. That's the way we're focusing on it.
Oh, that's great. And I kind of hit on another example I wanted to highlight, where this kind of bleeds into that, right? I know you're doing a lot of work in partnerships with the counties, and the west to east path corridor from the west side all the way to, I believe, UH is a part of that. Can you talk to that, and also maybe some of the other opportunities that you're collaborating with the counties?
Absolutely. Great partnership with all the counties, with the City and County of Honolulu. When we started looking at our bike path connectivity, or bike and walking path connectivity from the west side of the island all the way into UH, we saw there was a lot of paths that the state owns that stop and start, and so does the cities. So when we started looking at those discrete units, we thought if we linked them all together, we would have a path that could connect up that 22 miles from the west side of the island all the way into UH, which would be absolutely tremendous. We pushed forward on discretionary grant funding and got some from Senator Schatz's office to move forward on the planning piece of that. And that planning piece will allow us to set up the application that's necessary for us to go for another discretionary grant to build out that $60 million project. it would be tremendous. I mean, again, it's going to provide that connectivity in between the different communities for these different modes of transportation that can get people out of their vehicle.
And I know, again, with the counties, you've done and are doing a lot of work around, bolstering and supporting their transit efforts. Can you maybe speak to some of those? Because I don't think many people know that.
Yeah, the transit programs are really big for Hawaii. Rail, bus, and the like. Mass transit is going to be tremendous. Not only now for the people who depend on it, but in the future as we develop more housing units in different areas. For the state, we don't control transit.
Right.
We work with the counties on all of those. And the funding that comes from the federal government passes through the state to get to the counties. We don't take any credit in that because all we do is pass it through. But what we do is make sure that we can provide additional funding in different areas where they may be short. Every year, the federal government on the federal highways side has additional funding that they pull back into the program because some of the states just can't afford to match their funds, or they can't spend their funds during that fiscal year. When that happens, Federal Highways pulls it all back together and offers it back out to all the states. When they do that, we take advantage of it every time. So every year we've gotten between $40 to $100 million over and above the authority that we get because that's part of our economic development here. And we want to make sure that we become a profit center for the state, bring in as much money as possible to affect as much as we can. And it's not just in the highways that we do it. When we brought in that $100 million last year, part of it was to ensure that we could bring in more money for transit. So we kicked out $25 million to the counties to ensure that we could bolster their operations on the neighbor islands and also get some rolling stock for City and County of Honolulu here that they could electrify. We also kicked over $60 million over to HART to make sure that we could help close the gap between their funding plan and what the FAA thought they needed for that funding. And again, the money that we brought in doesn't necessarily have to come to us to benefit the state. All of this is going to be significant improvements into ensuring that people can live where they want and still get to where they need to go, even if they don't have a car.
I feel like more and more electric buses here on Oahu daily, and I know getting transit on the neighbor islands is important as well, and it can be a challenge, particularly as we recover from COVID. Transit ridership took a big hit, so those are very vital funds to support everyone.
And when they started pushing on the new electric buses, the stock is amazing. I mean, they look really, really good, super comfortable when you drive it, nice and quiet. And the great thing is, Honolulu, the City and County of Honolulu is such a big leader in that. Big Island is already pushing forward on electric buses. Tremendous.
No, it's all very exciting. And maybe, continuing off of that, I know, buses and transit and electrifying that is making good progress there, and appreciate the support, like I said. But I know you're also helping lead the charge within DOT's fleet and really across other government fleets in terms of electrifying their fleets. And that's been in the works for a few years. I wonder if you could maybe share some of the progress there, but maybe some of the challenges too, if you've come across them.
Absolutely. One of the biggest obstacles, I would say, for any government agency to start converting their fleet. First is going to be cost. Every state agency is constrained by a budget. And second is going to be a contracting vehicle. For an agency to purchase a vehicle could take up to 9 months if they purchased in increments at all times. Knowing that, we started moving forward on a new model for the state that allows us to purchase the service of an electric vehicle and any charging infrastructure that's necessary rather than the vehicle itself. So when we pushed forward on this type of contract, we got it from a city in Texas that started moving forward in that realm. We made sure that Federal Highways and the Joint Office, the Energy Office bought off on it to ensure that any federal funds that we bring in could be used for those things. And they did. They've totally supported it. When we started moving forward with that type of contract, we bought 43 Teslas. That would have cost us $2.8 million. And that's for the Tesla and the charging station. We bought it, and we're only paying $7,000 per month per vehicle based on the usage that we're anticipating for it. And at the end of the 8 years that we're contracted for those vehicles, we'll pay the $2.8 million that we would have paid up front. So overall, we spend the same amount of money, but we don't have to pay it up front. It helps us afford what we're trying to get done and spread out our costs to ensure that we can actually electrify our system. Plus, it helps us move forward on the electrification, the charging stations within our base yards very, very quickly. And this contract model is so easy that we made sure that all state agencies and all counties signed on as well. So all of the counties and all of our agencies can utilize that same contract to start electrifying their fleet, and they're taking advantage of it now. DAGS is looking at 400 vehicles that they're going to bring in. We're looking at 120 trucks that we're going to bring in, because one of the biggest pieces was the mid-sized vehicles that all agencies like DLNR and everybody needs. So we'll get another 120 electric trucks that are coming in. All of the other agencies are picking up different vehicles for their usage. The cool thing about this is not just the electrification move, though. It's getting everybody set on understanding what infrastructure needs are necessary at their areas of work.
Yep.
And it also allows agencies to really consider how many vehicles they need.
Right.
So we have 300 light-duty vehicles. At the end of our conversion, probably 220 at the most, because we understand that we can start utilizing them in different areas and phase out a whole bunch that we didn't need from the past. So it's just a really good exercise for everyone.
Yeah, it's like what, 20-30% reduction in vehicles. Those cost savings right there. You get cost savings from driving electric, not to emission, obviously the emission savings and environmental benefits as well. Right, you mentioned the e-bikes. I know that's a relatively new program. At least from the data I've read, like across the country, e-bikes are just exploding. And I think we're seeing that on the ground here. I feel again like just in town here, even in our neighborhood, that kids, Kapuna, everyone seems to be on them, for better or worse. But I know you guys are supporting a program to help even grow e-bikes further, which is again another affordable mobility option.
Absolutely. We're super excited to see a bill go through last year that allowed us to subsidize e-bikes for our residents in Hawaii. Bill passed, became law, gave us a bucket of funding, but it lacked the authority for us to expend it. But we liked the bill. We supported it, and we think it's a good bill. So we decided to move forward on the program with our own state highway funding to make sure we could continue it. We opened it up in February, and since then we got about 220 applications that came in. The other government agencies, DAGS, that has to help us out in cutting checks, helps us tremendously. So for this program, if you're 18, if you participate in a low-income program, or if you're going to school, or if you certify that you don't have a four-wheel vehicle, you qualify for a subsidy of up to $500 or 20% of the e-bike that you purchase. And it's a great program because, it's free money for people.
Right.
It allows us to help people that potentially couldn't afford to purchase it in the first place. And it allows us to help extend the range that somebody might need to get to and from where they need to go.
Yeah.
So it just helps fill that transportation gap that we see. For people who may not be able to live as close as they'd want to their work, it's a viable option now, instead of jumping on a vehicle.
Yeah, like you mentioned, right, increasing access. I'll be honest, my mind keeps on going back to your comment on the structure for the electric vehicles and how you took some lessons learned from Texas.
Getting our experts together in different forums really helps us understand the concerns we don't even know we have sometimes. When we start hearing it from other agencies, especially, I would say, so Joint Office, when they got together, they have a great setup. Getting the whole region together to talk about concerns about this NEVI program that's being pushed forth in the bill. And when the region gets together, everybody can talk about the shortcomings in their different states and talk about how others had gotten over it. I didn't even know when we put this contract together to purchase the service of electrification that it would be considered appropriate for a third-party partner that you could have in NEVI. So so this contract is already available to us. When we report on the call that we're moving forward on our charging stations, our 4-port 150s that are required as the NEVI in the NEVI plan, other states are blown away because they're still trying to procure a contract like this. We're light years ahead of it right now.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so we're anticipating installing our first one in 2 months.
All right.
And then by the end of the year, hopefully half of them. We could have gone faster, but right now it's very difficult to get the stock from electrification or from the, because there's so many requirements for Buy America.
Right.
it's just hard to get the charging stations, but we're up front. We're on first. So
These are not just normal charging stations either, right? You kind of mentioned it, but it's four ports, 150 kW each, so 600 kW unit, which is fairly heavy duty.
Big time.
Particularly when you're talking about an island grid.
Exactly. We wanted to try and see, and I think the federal government set it up really nicely. They wanted to make sure that owning an electric vehicle and charging up is almost like a gas station.
Yep.
You shouldn't be there for an hour and a half.
Convenience.
Yes. So 15, 20 minutes, you should have 50% of your charge. You can be on your way already.
Yeah.
So we're setting it up that way. We're making sure that when we set up these NEVI chargers, these 4-port 150s, we're putting them in areas where people want to be. One of them we're looking at is a hot tower. To make sure when you charge up there's something around you, right? You're not in the middle of nowhere in a gravel field.
Yes. Go grab a coffee or something for 15 minutes and you'll be good to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the push. So really like the program, really like the direction it's going, and we're happy that we have this partner that allows us to move forward quickly. For Hawaii, I think everybody should understand, when you put Hawaii up to other states, I mean, just California, for instance, we're third in the nation, I believe, in adoption rate. But the volume of vehicles that we can take in is nothing compared to the larger states. So if we didn't have a partner in purchasing like our contract, it would be very difficult for us to get in line with everybody else, because once California starts ordering their 2 million vehicles, we're out, right? So having this partner that allows us to purchase these vehicles and this infrastructure over and above what Hawaii needs, tremendous for us.
Changing topics a bit, which I think I know the theme here is mostly ground transportation because that's a key area of ours. So I'm not trying to diminish the other areas under DOT, but right within ground transportation, I know you guys have been exploring and working on this transition to a road user charge. I know that's as we move to more efficient vehicles, electric vehicles, right now predominantly source of funding for you all is the gas tax. So in theory that will, when we get to a zero emission state, that will be eliminated, which in reality, in theory, eliminates your funding. So it's another source of funding as we support, the need for that. So I'm just curious to get an update on that. What's the status? What are some of the next steps with that evolution?
Yeah. So really thank the public. We did 14 public meetings when we first started off our pilot program. Got a whole bunch of information for the community on how we should run the pilot. Made sure that we sent everybody. I don't know if you guys got one, but during the time that we ran the pilot, we sent fake bills to everybody and said, this is what you paid in gas tax last year, and if we move to a road user charge, this is what you'll pay instead. So everybody could just kind of feel what the change would look like. We ran a 2,000 vehicle pilot that ran people through a road user charge program to make sure everybody could see what it would kind of look like.
Right.
But more importantly, it allowed us to see what we need to stand up internally to make sure we could run a program like that. Right now, super simple for me, right? I kick back in my office and I wait for a check to come in from DOTAX on the amount of fuel tax that we had for that quarter. But now when we run through a road user
hopefully
charge,
you're doing more than just sitting in your office, but I get the point.
So when we run through a road user charge program, now the DOT is going to be responsible for tracking, for collecting, and for operating and enforcing a program like this. We're going to make sure we can stand everything up efficiently to ensure that we don't cost everybody a lot more money when we do a program like this. So that's what the pilot was for, and it came out a lot more favorable than we thought it would in the beginning. At the end, about 40% supported the need for something like this. And of course, everybody had a different concept of what it would look like. Well, we took that information to the legislature, and this year a bill was passed that allows us to move forward on a pilot for road user charge. And in that pilot, it would only be limited to electric vehicle owners right now. At this time, electric vehicle owners pay a flat rate of $50 on their registration fee. What this bill does is replace that with the potential. You could still pay the $50 if you want, up to another 3 years or so. But what we'd rather people do is opt in to this road user charge program, where you would no longer pay the $50. You would just pay your rate. You would pay a rate for every mile you drive on the system up to $50. So you can't lose. You're not going to pay any more than the $50. But getting into the road user charges program allows you to potentially pay less, but also allows us the opportunity to run the program and see what it would look like when we start transitioning everybody to that program. So overall, it's a way that, as you said, allows us to preserve the funding that's necessary to upgrade and update the roads and bridges that we have. But it also allows us to make sure that we don't put all those funding needs on a small portion of the economy. Right? Just make sure that equity is across the board. We're trying to do it in a way to make sure that we don't disincentivize the conversion to electric vehicles, because we're all for it. We want to make sure that all the state government vehicles are being converted. We're working with rental cars to do so as well. But there's going to be a transition point in there that we all got to work through.
So on this transition and the gas tax and road user charge, being kind of the wonk that I am, kind of giving this a lot of thought, or not a lot, but thinking about it some. And I'm curious just, right, if there's been any discussions here or elsewhere with a kind of out-of-the-box structure or a concept. And I say that in the regards of, right, when we think about like the 2045 goals or 2050 and the net zero economy and everything. Obviously, driving, I'm not going to argue, there's a need to drive, and it serves a purpose for many things. But at the same time, these structures arguably incent Department of Transportation to encourage more driving, since that leads to more funding. And I'm not saying you guys do that, but right, the structure is there, right? If there are different people in place and whatnot. So I guess my question is, have you come across or have seen any other structures that don't have those incentives in place, or are just kind of different incentives? And I know it's a tough nut to crack, but I figure I have you here. That's why I'd give it a shot. So, because I haven't seen any, I haven't even thought of any or read of any even like potential, but I'm just curious, given the circles that you...
There haven't been yet. Yeah. So I was the chair of the Road Usage Charge America for the states that are running through programs right now. And everybody's doing it a little bit differently, but kind of going in the same direction. Treating driving like a utility. Yeah. So you pay for what you use. When we start looking at the structure and starting to see what other opportunities we might have to adjust the behaviors that we'd like to see as we go forward, it gets convoluted enough that the public doesn't trust that we're looking at their best interests. Yep. So what we found is the best way to move forward at this time is just to make sure the public can see very, very transparently. This is the cost of transportation right now. This is the cost you pay right now. And this is what we're charging you that's absolutely equal to what you'd have paid before. As we go forward and as we clean that up with the public so they can see transparently where all their money is going, then I think we have opportunities to adjust other bills to ensure that we incentivize people to the behaviors that we'd love to see to make sure that we can match our 2045 goals.
New governor, right? And like I said, you're new leadership role for you. What are your priorities, or what are your kind of core needs or focus areas, thinking through the next 3 to 4 years with this governor?
Yeah, I think with this governor, the big priority points are housing, energy security, food security. Those big pieces. Climate adaptation, another big piece that we're looking at, and economy, how it affects the economy in the end. For me, the first focal point got to be 107 people dying every year in the system, and how we get rid of that model, that piece. I think in general, the DOT in general, since 2006, has done a good job to get numbers down from 160 high to 107 average right now. But we're stuck at 107 people, and hard for me to celebrate 53 lives saved with 107 people dying every year. So trying to see how we get the public to stop being desensitized to that number. Right. That number's a big one. If we can push down that number every year by 10% and save another 10 lives, that's the goal. Right. To get down to that zero. If we get down to zero tomorrow, I'd love to get there. But fully understanding that there's going to be work that's necessary, and a lot of enforcement work that's necessary. So you see the red light cams that we already have out there. This year, the legislature passed a bill to allow us to photo enforce noise. And we supported it tremendously because enforcement is enforcement. And if we can stop our police officers from having to be out there to enforce those things, better for everybody. But it also is a gateway for us to push towards speed enforcement in the system. Now, there's a lot of reasons for crashes on the system. Our data shows 50 to 55% drunk and drug driving. And you saw this at the drunk driving climate, right? 50 to 55% drunk and drug driving. Another 30% or so, 35% excessive speed. And another 20% distracted driving. So there's a lot of reasons for crashes. But in every crash, speed is the reason people died, regardless of what the reason for the crash was. So for us, if we can get rid of speed on the system, if we can get everybody to just drive the speed limit, everybody's safer. In-vehicle occupants, they're dying at about 45% clip on the system. Bicyclists and pedestrians, 25 to 30 per year in each category. 25 to 30 for pedestrians, 5 to 7 bicyclists per year. Motorcycle moped riders, about 25 to 30 a year. If we can adjust the speed on the system to ensure we get rid of that, we keep drunk and drug driving, keep excessive speed and the like, we still save half the lives immediately. So that's the focus for me, to make sure that we can get those lives lost down. When we do that, we start opening up this system, this transportation system that we have for pedestrians, vehicles, and bicyclists throughout, for everybody. Right now, there's a lot of areas that I wouldn't walk or drive in or ride a bike in because it just doesn't feel like the right place to be. Right. So that's the goal right now, focusing on that, the speed portion. After we get the safety component set, it's resetting all of our infrastructure to ensure that it meets the needs of the public today and into the future, not the 50 years ago that was designed for. Right. So that's the big goal for us. And as we're doing this, making sure that all of these are aligned to the goals that the governor's trying to hit. Yeah. So these infrastructure improvements are going to be focused in areas where new developments are going to be coming up. And the great thing about that is when we build that new infrastructure to connect the new housing to the new commercial areas, we can set it up for multiple modes of transportation in the way it's supposed to be, right, and not just focusing on drivers. Yeah. So it's just a huge opportunity for us.
I know we're kind of getting close to time. We didn't necessarily cover everything, but I know you're busy. You got a lot of things going on, so I really appreciate you taking the time to have this chat with us. And I know I learned a lot, and so it was really informative for me, and really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks.